so many people suffering from eating disorders across Australia. And at the time when she first was formally diagnosed with it, I searched the web and for books and for podcasts and videos or anything to tell about the family's experience. And I was shocked to find that there was nothing really that spoke about just how awful it was.
G'day and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with Katherine Schultz. Katherine is a photographer based in Adelaide, Australia, and she is on the show today to talk about her experiences in having a sister going through anorexia. Katherine's perspective as a sibling of someone with anorexia is a rarely heard from perspective on the condition, and she's on the line now to share her journey with us. Hello Katherine, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Hello, how are you?
I'm pretty good, Katherine. Before I begin, could you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself?
So I am a self-employed. I work for myself as a photographer down in the south of Australia, and I'm one of 5 kids, very close with all my siblings. Yeah, I have a sister who's been struggling with an eating disorder for some time now.
When did you start to first kind of notice that anorexia was kind of becoming a problem for your sister?
So I believe it was around when she was 15 years old, and at the time I was only 20. And for me, sort of as a sister, I kind of noticed that there were some subtle changes in the beginning, such as making her own food, more exercise. She was walking to school as opposed to joining us for a lift. She was dropping weight, but not at a super rapid rate. It was definitely more a subtle, gradual change. But when you sort of added all the things together, you started to realise there was definitely something bigger going on. And I also remember there was times when we would go out for dinner or we would have family meals and she would sort of say, oh, I don't feel well, or I've got a funny stomach, or I have a headache, to sort of be able to get out of eating with all of us. So she did start to isolate herself, which is definitely all very typical signs to look for with eating disorders. But the problem is they're so subtle in the moment. You sort of agree with the situation and go, she's not feeling well, or she just wants to walk a bit more, and they're kind of disguised as healthier sort of lifestyle choices. But it does become a slippery slope, I think, very quickly.
You touched on the isolation that your sister was kind of partaking in. How did that make you feel as a sister? Like, did you feel like she was kind of pulling away from you, or did you have that feeling?
In the beginning, not really. It was definitely too subtle to notice. Then it obviously gradually got worse as things progressed. But in the very beginning, it really went unnoticed. And just to finish on the question before, I think for me, I sort of picked up on things quicker just because I felt like I was closer in age and more attuned to maybe sort of the things that girls in that age bracket do to lose weight, whereas parents, I think, can find it harder to pick up on those things.
Did it impact your daily life?
It impacted the family's daily life for sure. Families obviously spend a lot of time having meals together. You know, everyone has their different jobs and their different schedules, and most families do come together for meals on weeknights or the weekends. And I think we sort of started to realise that she wasn't behaving the way that she normally would, or that she wouldn't want to be a part of those. And then that sort of caused a sense of unease about what was happening. So everyone started to feel that sort of level of anxiety about what was actually starting to unfold here.
And I know in our pre-discussion before we started this interview with this next question, you mentioned you didn't want to go into specifics, but would you mind sharing with us a bit about what kind of things can bring on eating disorders?
Yeah, so in many cases, different levels of childhood trauma can sort of later manifest in lots of different mental disorders, such as any form of an eating disorder, so not just anorexia, binge eating disorder, alcoholism, depression, anxiety in general as well. So any form of childhood trauma can definitely manifest in an eating disorder in later life, and that can be, you know, any sort of childhood trauma.
Yep.
You know, breaking up of the homes as well, divorce, anything like that can really start it. I mean, there's a lot of discussion as well about perfectionism and social media in this day and age as well, and with not just women, but women and men comparing themselves and striving, you know, to make their bodies look a different way, which which, like I mentioned earlier, can start as a bid to have a healthier lifestyle but quickly snowball into something else.
Would you say that as anorexia develops, it's a gradual thing?
I would say so, yes. And I think in my discussions with treating teams, they do tend to say that the quicker that you can pick up on the signs and the quicker that therefore you can get that person or yourself into treatment, the easier it is to treat. Whereas if it's been manifesting for a long time, it's definitely harder to undo or unwind those belief structures.
Have you observed in your sister that the symptoms kind of fluctuate within her? She kind of has good days, but then she has bad moments, or is it?
Yeah, I think for her sort of situation, it was very obvious to see, like, as time went on, that she was falling deeper into it, and the deeper that she fell into it, the harder it was to sort of have conversations with her about it, and she kind of really lost like a spark as well. And I think many people talk about that, like you sort of lose sight of the person that you know them to be as this sort of disorder takes over their personality. And something I wrote down earlier, that you're sort of told to see this eating disorder as a separate entity to your sibling or your daughter or whatever. And that was definitely the case. Like the more months that went on and the behaviour was manifesting and becoming bigger, the less I sort of saw of the person that I thought the person that I knew.
You mentioned like that she kind of lost a bit of her spark. Like, how did that feel for you as a sister?
It's definitely a traumatic situation, and I think there are so many people suffering from eating disorders across Australia. Like the numbers are staggering. And at the time when she first was formally diagnosed with it, I searched the web and for books and for podcasts and videos or anything to tell about the family's experience, because I was finding it extremely difficult, as with my other siblings. And I was shocked to find that there was nothing really that spoke about just how awful it was, because you definitely feel extremely helpless, and you feel your own sort of loss of control because of that helplessness. Like there's nothing that you can really say or do or prescribe that will, fix the eating disorder, so to speak. So you're sort of watching somebody that you love, lose weight, but also lose themselves, which is, really, really difficult for sure.
Are there many supports for siblings of people that have anorexia?
No, not.
Okay.
Short answer, no. There are support groups that have been set up, I believe, but they're very few and far between. I believe where I'm from, there used to be like a place that you could go as a carer, I think like once a fortnight or once a month, but it actually shut down maybe a couple of years before I sort of looked into it. So it was very disheartening and lonely experience for myself. And I just remember at the time thinking, like, I can't imagine like how hard it must be for my sister going through this, but this sort of sense of guilt going, I'm finding it really difficult as well. And it wasn't until I sort of sought my own help through a psychologist that I started to realise, like, it's okay to find this really difficult. Even if it's not happening, the eating disorder's not happening to you, the experience and the ripple effects definitely are. And it's very difficult.
How do you think we can get some more supports in there? Like, what kind of needs to change in that sector for like families and siblings and?
That's a great question. I think a good start would be to have some in-person support. I think perhaps going back to what they used to offer, which was some in-person support meetings, similar to how Al-Anon works for family members or to partners or to anyone really. I think you can also attend, if a friend is wanting help to sort of help a friend going through alcoholism. But I would say there needs to be a push for something like that offered in every state. And then obviously not forgetting that there are regional people who live in regional areas needing it as well. So in that instance, perhaps some sort of Zoom support meeting would be helpful as well. I think just being able to have shared experiences and being able to discuss, the inner world and the inner feelings that are going on as a support person to somebody experiencing it.
If you don't mind sharing with us, Kathrine, where is your sister at now with the anorexia?
So she's still fighting it for sure, and still in treatment, and it's an ongoing battle, and it's definitely been a long battle so far, but she's still putting up a good fight.
Yep.
and yeah, every day sort of taking it one day at a time, basically.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Katherine Schultz, where we are talking about her journey in being the sister of someone with anorexia. How have you and your parents kind of gone about trying to manage it or assist your sister with her condition?
So they do their best to support her and set up sort of things around her that may be helpful as she's sort of grown out of being a teenager and into her early 20s. It sort of shifts and changes. You're talking more about, whether that person is studying, whether they can manage a job, whether they still can live at home or whether they're actually capable of living out of home. And basically my parents, work with her to help make those decisions and see where she's at. And I know there's other cases, other friends that I've sort of met who in their sister or brother's case, they're able to live out of home and they're able to have a job. And then in other cases, they're just there in their early 20s, mid-20s and still need complete assistance from their parents and still spend significant time inpatient treatment as well.
You've mentioned that your sister's had the condition for quite a while. Have you seen glimpses of that spark though again? Like have you seen glimpses of it like as time has gone on?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely in the beginning was a deteriorating situation where it was definitely like getting worse for a long time and then things sort of plateaued. In the time since that, in the last few years, it's kind of had its ups and downs where there's better sort of months and then there's months where it's almost like relapses. But during that time, there have been moments where I've, had good days with her and good conversations and been able to hang out. And then there's been a lot of time as well where there's a lot of distance between us because it feels like the eating disorder and mental disorders associated are more significant. And so it's almost like there's no space for that relationship.
When your sister finally got that diagnosis, did that offer a lot of closure for you and your parents?
It did. It kind of gave you the ability to put a label on it. And when you have a label on it, I feel like that's when you start like the research and you start going, okay, this is what it is. Like, what do people do about it? Whereas when you're not really sure and there's no label on it, you're even more in the dark, I suppose. Because, once you have an eating disorder diagnosis, you can start looking around in Australia, what treatment is available in each state and, what way do we go about this? What's the best way to deal with this? So I think it provided, not sure if it provided closure, but it provided direction maybe as to where to go next.
Have you found that there's, for those that do have anorexia, are there good supports there?
Yeah, look, I believe that in Australia there are a number of different clinics in operation, and I can't speak for what it's like on the inside. I can only speak for what it was like visiting a couple of them. And it did seem that, Sydney has a great treatment facility, and there's a new facility in Queensland that's been set up by the Butterfly Foundation, which has Australia's first residential treatment facility. However, it only a small number of people can be there at any one time, and there's such a huge demand that the waiting lists are very, very long. So it is an incredible facility, but not many people are able to access it at any one time, and there's just so many people out there needing help. So while I do think we are moving in the right direction to have the help available, I just think we need to be moving maybe at a faster rate. There needs to be more funding towards these treatment facilities because, there's just these people who obviously would feel quite hopeless, being so far down on the waiting list. Or I know my sister's spoken about the feeling that if you're so far down on the waiting list, you almost feel like you need to get sicker in order to get better. To be noticed and to be admitted, which is a horrible mentality. I think we are moving in the right direction, but we need to move faster.
Yeah. Did you ever have any mental strategies like within yourself and how to deal with like what your sister was going through?
I found great help in my own sort of therapy, my own psych sessions, because I think I knew what eating disorders were because of school. Like we learnt about that. I went to an all-girls school and we learnt what eating disorders are and body image issues. But it was very difficult to understand it when you're watching somebody truly deteriorate, because you're trying to wrap your head around, like, why would somebody do this to themselves? Like, why can't they stop? Which again is similar to what I've heard with alcoholism. It's very difficult to look at somebody making this choice and go, "What? Why?" It's so frustrating. So for me, I think having those conversations with a psychologist and truly learning about what it's about and where it comes from and why those behaviours manifest helped me to have a clearer head. To have those conversations with my sister without being like, "What are you doing?"
Did your sister ever find it hard to talk about it with you?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of shame in not just eating disorders, but lots of mental disorders. People find it hard to talk about depression. And I think she was embarrassed about a lot of things at first, but she did start to open up a little more as she sort of went into treatments and more things were, on the table for the family to know. So she sort of opened up a bit more. But I think a lot of people suffering do find it hard to have those conversations. They feel misunderstood because, as I said, like, I think a lot of us think we understand what eating disorders are, but we really don't. Yeah.
Understanding the condition, like that it's not a choice, was that a big step in your understanding towards it and to understanding your sister?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think, because you really do think to yourself, when you see someone fading before your very eyes, you're like, why would you do this? But then I think when I started to see how isolated she was and, the lack of experiences she was getting because of her isolation, I thought no one would choose this willingly. And that's the thing. There's this stigma that, comes from years ago where people think, eating disorders are, like this vain condition where people just want to lose weight. But it's not about the weight at all. Like, eating disorders aren't about, the kilograms. It's this true manifestation of control and loss of control. And when you really start to understand that, you go, someone wouldn't choose this life willingly because it's horror for them. And I think, they do see the horror that has, the ripple effect of that horror, And I saw a lot of sadness in her when she sort of knew how much it was hurting the people around her as well. And you really do realise, no one would do this just through a choice.
Do you think that society, like wider society, understands eating disorders and anorexia?
Not at all. I don't think people understand it unless they've gone through it, which is, again, a lot of mental disorders. But I do think that stigma is still pretty strong, that it's like, it's a vain female condition, like, they just want to lose weight. But you do forget as well, men also struggle with eating disorders. And like I said, you speak to any psychologist and quickly understand, like, it's not at all about just wanting to lose weight. It's always something deeper. And in fact, there was a great quote that I read a couple of years ago that said, the eating disorder is a symptom of a deeper condition, like a deeper issue, which is a great way of putting it.
What are some ways do you think that we can work on some of the stigma or misunderstandings towards eating disorders that society might have?
I think just education is obviously a big one. And I think there's, I know Butterfly Foundation does some wonderful work in trying to educate the public on what eating disorders are and why they occur. We ran a fundraiser here a couple of years ago for the new facility that was in Queensland. And I think, fundraising is a great way to get the word out and also to try and put some more funding into facilities. I'm not sure, perhaps, I've seen some great documentaries as well that people watch on different conditions, which definitely open your eyes. I think all of that would be beneficial.
When did your sister first start to undertake recovery or kind of go into some of those places that kind of assist with recovery?
Her first admission was when she, very soon after her 18th birthday. So probably about 2 or 3 years into having an eating disorder. She had some hospital treatment and then was referred on to some sort of psychiatric care for eating disorders that was as a part of the state. And I would consider, that's like moving in the step towards recovery, but everyone's experience of that is different. Some people find it very, very beneficial. Sometimes that model of care doesn't work well for people. It's all case by case, I think. And for her, that was definitely like a starting point to begin recovery, but it comes along with years after that. There were relapses and different attempts at different styles of therapy.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Katherine Schultz, where we are talking about her journey in being the sister of someone with anorexia.
While your sister was undertaking recovery or at the different times when she did it, how did that feel for you as a sister? Like, what was your experience of it?
Again, it was pretty traumatic because I remember when I first found out that she was going to be put in hospital and fed through a tube, I could not wrap my head around it. Like, I could not believe that my, clever, smart, witty, funny, caring sister would need to be in a hospital bed and fed through a tube. Like, I just thought, how absurd. Why? Why on earth would she need that? Like, why couldn't she just eat? Why couldn't she just, be put in this structure and, watched and monitored, and that would be okay? But I really distinctly remember finding that out and just sitting with that information for a couple of days going, I can't believe this. Like, I cannot believe that somebody needs to be force-fed directly to their stomach, when things are this bad. And it really did take me a couple of days to process that, and then to also have the courage to go and see her in that condition, which is something I'll definitely never forget. And yeah, I guess over time, you start to be exposed to those sorts of things associated with the eating disorder, and you kind of get used to it. But the shock at the beginning was something that I definitely will remember for a long time. What
would your advice be to some of the people listening that might be family members, parents or siblings of someone going through anorexia or an eating disorder? What would be your advice to them, just generally about it all?
Just know that you can't fix it, and you can't cure it by virtue of being, a family member or a partner, or no matter how much you love them, you can't fix it and you cannot cure it for them. And that's kind of step one, because I think you start to feel this big responsibility for this person who's unwell, going, I need to fix them, I need to watch them, I need to make them get better. And understanding that you alone can't do that is a big piece of advice, I think. And second to that, I would probably seek out your own help. And I'm aware that, many people can't afford to see a private psychologist, but, whether you can engage in some sort of counselling service or speaking to some sort of professional just to be able to, like I said, understand the condition and also vent, speak about how it is affecting you, because, like I said, it's valid for it to be affecting you. It is a traumatic situation. So understanding you can't fix it, seeking out your own help, and also implementing some boundaries yourself, because the eating disorder, happening to the person that you love is going to be quite the devil at certain points. And I think learning to have your boundaries and what you will and will not tolerate is also very important for your own mental health. But that's extremely difficult. Definitely easier said than done, but I feel like getting your help from a professional will help you implement that. And then finally, I think as well, just being a listening ear to your sister or brother or partner or child is also extremely important.
What do you want the future to hold for your sister and you?
I would love to see her in a state of steady recovery. Similar to alcoholism, they do say it's a lifelong thing, that person will always be recovering or in recovery. And, so I don't sort of say I just wanted to be cured from her eating disorder. I just want to see her living a life that's more full and more free, and definitely centered way more towards recovery than not. And she has incredible potential within her, and I just want her to be able to live out that potential as well. And I would love to continue a relationship with her that's not centered around mental illness. There's so much more to her than mental illness, and I would love our relationship to become more about that in the future.
Well, thank you for taking the time, Katherine, to share all these things with us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure.
My guest today was Katherine Schultz. Tune in next week where we talk to Addie Barkin, an activist against anorexia in the fashion industry. And if you like this content, check out the Wellbeing podcast for more. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.